Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. This film is directed by Wes Ball this time around. This one stars Owen Teague and Kevin Durand along with a lot of other people in this film, and I really love these Planet of the Apes movies. Obviously the original is a classic for a reason, but the most recent trilogy, of course the more recent ones directed by Matt Reeves, are absolutely phenomenal. Some of my favorite films ever, and honestly one of my favorite trilogies and most underrated trilogies of all time. And so going into another Apes film after I think it's been 7 years since War for the Planet of the Apes, I was very excited, although very, skeptical going into this because of course there is a lot to live up to, specifically with War and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I love those two films so much, and so going to this one my expectations were sky high, and I walked out of the theater a bit skeptical, almost to a point where I was like, God, I need to watch this movie again before I review the movie. And so that's exactly what I did. I went ahead and I watched the film again because I had a lot of questions walking out of this film, and I think a lot of you guys might have the similar questions that I had walking out. And so I will be getting to spoilers for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. If you have not seen this movie, go check it out. It's another really solid entry into the franchise, and I do think this rewatch really did help my perspective of this film. So what is this film about? Well, essentially it takes place many generations after the entire Caesar trilogy had taken place. It's essentially 300 years into the future, and so this movie doesn't really follow any of the descendants of Caesar. At least you're not told that they are the descendants of Caesar, but Caesar's impact on the planet of the apes is very much felt all these years later. Although Noah's, entire clan, the Eagle clan that he is a part of, isn't necessarily, he doesn't really know about the history of the world because his elders haven't really sought out the histories, the mysteries of, these buildings and what the humans were when they ruled the world. They don't really know any of this stuff, so he's kind of a blank slate, and especially when he's introduced into all these ideas by Raka's character and by, the madman or the mad ape that is Proximus Caesar later on into the film. It is all kind of tied together, and it is really a journey with this character as to finding exactly who he is going to be, who he's going to grow up as, and it's kind of a coming of age story for this character, which I thought was a very interesting idea to take this, film into. As the first one in a potential trilogy, I do think that in terms of everything that this movie does really well, obviously the visual effects are incredible, but the character arc for Noah is really, really solid. And I think the first 20 or 30 minutes of this film does a great job at establishing this new world because, again, the opening scene does show Caesar's funeral. You see, Maurice, you see Rocky, you see all the characters that you loved from the previous trilogy kind of lighting the fire to set Caesar ablaze, to kind of, send him off into the afterlife or whatever they're going to do there. That religious moment, you see the symbol on the rock that, of course, is going to echo throughout all of time until you get into where we are in current day. But then you move on to establish who the Eagle clan is and how these apes kind of go off. There's this trio of apes that is Noah, SOONA, and ANAYA, who are on this journey to get these eggs to raise the eagles on their own. And there's this really cultural, dynamic that these apes have, this clan has, that has so much importance to, raising your own egg into becoming an eagle, and the importance of that, and singing to them, making that bond with these creatures. That was, honestly, it was very interesting. I love how they set up this clan to be a very specific type of way where they follow the rule of law that they have established in this world. They don't really mess with the echoes, or who they, now call humans. They call them echoes instead of humans because they don't really know exactly what that history is. And there's all these different, bits and pieces that you find out about this clan before, of course, the kingdom that is being run by Proximus Caesar kind of is on the hunt for this human character that we'll find out is May later on in the film. But they find the Eagle clan and they absolutely just tear everything to shreds. They burn it all to the ground and they kidnap the entire clan, essentially. You also see that Noah is very close to his mother, and this bond that he has with his parents are very interesting because he has a very loving relationship with his mom, but his dad, he feels all this pressure to live up to his expectations because he is the leader of the clan, and because he has a very specific way of teaching his eagles, and his eagle named Son, I believe is like Son or Eagle Son, I think is the eagle's name. But that eagle doesn't really like Noah for whatever reason, so he feels like he has to live up to expectations, not only to live up to his father's expectations, but to raise an eagle in the way that he has, but to also get the approval from his father and the approval from this eagle later on because his father is killed in this raid. And you become very endeared into Noah's character because of his quest to be able to find his clan and to bring them home, because he's not necessarily on a revenge tour. He definitely has this darkness to him, as you kind of see hinted at throughout this film, of him kind of wanting revenge, but his goal really is to find his clan and to bring him home and to just, rebuild everything that they had lost, and to kind of gain his father's approval through his eagle, through, going on to this quest and learning what's right and wrong, and going through this coming of age story that I thought was extremely well done. And just not to skip over to the end, but the point in the end of the film where he's talking to the eagle and says that the rule of law that Proximus Caesar is, running his kingdom with is wrong, and all that is wrong, and he finally gets the approval of, Eagle Son, and he flies to him. That was such a beautiful moment. So his arc, going from this trepidatious kid that, just wants nothing but to prove himself to his father, to go on this giant quest to save his entire clan, to bring them home, I thought all of that stuff was really good. But this movie is really broken up into 3 different sections. You have all that stuff with the Eagle clan before things fall apart, and then you have the entire middle section, which is, of course, Noah going on his journey and meeting a few new characters along the way, including, Raka, who is this orangutan that is kind of this... I guess he's kind of like a religious missionary. He knows the teachings of Caesar. He knows that, he had, the apes together, strong ape, do not kill ape. All these different, philosophies that Caesar had that he led with in his time has kind of been passed down generation to generation to generation, and it's found its way to Raka. And even though he doesn't know the full true story, he thinks that, apes built all these buildings as kind of, places where humans can, come together in herds. And it's not that the humans were in control. The apes are always in control, and something happened, and now the human population has dwindled for whatever reason. But he doesn't really know the truth that we know, that humans did rule the world at first. He just knows that philosophy that Caesar led by, and the ideas of morality that he has been passed down through this giant game of telephone, essentially. And through this, you get to see how Raka treats the human characters in this film, and how he treats them with compassion, with interest, and with, this care for them, even though, like, the Eagle clan kind of treats humans, or echoes as they call them, as these other things that they don't really want to interact with. They're scavengers, they're savages, he just wants to stay away from them at any cost. But of course, Raka is there to teach him that compassion that Caesar once had for humans, that again has been passed down from many generations. And this is kind of where you get to see, this character, like I said at the beginning of the review, was kind of a blank slate. This is a character that has a lot to learn throughout the journey of this movie, and I think Raka's character was a great foil for this character to learn all these things, to learn compassion, to learn how to be a good leader in the way that Caesar would. And then of course now you have that mirrored with the character Proximus Caesar, who is introduced, that has kind of taken Caesar's words and this legend of Caesar into a way of control. And so this is where you get the 3rd section of the movie, which is after literally an hour and a half into this movie, you finally get to meet Proximus Caesar, played by Kevin Durand, who is this, this king, essentially, that has built up this idea that Caesar was this great ape. He was the first elder of all the apes, and now he is the next generation of Caesar, and he uses the words of apes together strong, and uses the words to essentially control all these people. What he does is he goes out, he finds other clans, and he essentially takes all of them and subjugates them by fear. He rules by fear and fear alone, and he uses Caesar's words to get them to follow him. And this is another character where you get to see the philosophies of Caesar being used in a negative light, unlike, Raka's character, and you get to see how Noah's character kind of processes how, the words of Caesar has been, used and manipulated by these different people, by these different ideologies, to where he can inform his own opinion on these things, and, kind of become the type of leader that Caesar was naturally throughout the course of this film. And again, everything with Noah's arc in this film, pun intended, everything with that, I really, really did enjoy. But then there's some of the more, let's get into the negatives that I have with this film before I get into the questions that I had walking out of this movie after first watch, which, I loved Raka's character. I thought he was a really interesting character. I loved the philosophies that he had, and he was a very entertaining presence. There's a lot of comedy that you got with this character. And when you had the trio kind of form between Raka, Noah, and May, the human character that is along this journey with them, who I will get into in a second, because she has the most questions that I have about this film that has to do with her story in this movie. But in general, when you have these 3 going together in this middle portion of the movie, I really like their dynamic. And there's a great scene that you saw featured in the trailer a lot, where May is kind of going after, and she's running through this tall grass while this other, gorilla is chasing after her, and she jumps onto the horse with Noah. There's a lot of great moments like that. The hunting scene with humans, all that stuff was great. But then you get to the bridge sequence and get to see, these characters once again are coming in and closing in on these characters to try to kidnap May, to try to kidnap Noah, and they end up killing Raka in this scene where they're fighting on this bridge, and he goes out into the water and he gets, rushed away by the waves. And This is probably the biggest disappointment that I have with this film, is because I was convinced that this character wasn't dead in this moment, because at least in terms of the way that it was shot, it didn't seem like they were about to kill off this character that they, featured heavily on the posters in the marketing of this film, and to have him just be washed away, the character that kind of stood for what Caesar stood for in the previous films, the person who kind of passed down those messages to our main character, for him to be washed away in the way that he was and to never return throughout the rest of the movie, I was very disappointed, because I wanted to see his philosophy of how he, kind of lived his life to Caesar's words. I want to see that philosophy clash with Proximus Caesar's philosophy on what Caesar's words meant to him. I wanted to see those two characters interact so badly, because I think that's the most interesting part about War for the Planet of the Apes, and especially Dawn for the Planet of the Apes, is that idea of this moral conflict between these characters, and to have these ideologies of either Caesar and Koba kind of clash in that movie. And so when you set this film 300 years later, and you have this idea of this giant telephone game throughout generations of storytelling of, building up Caesar as this like messianic figure to these apes, and you have the different interpretations of the text that he left behind, I wanted to see that ideology and those ideas and the morality between these characters. I wanted to see them clash, and I wanted that to be the point of the movie, like they were in Dawn and War. And unfortunately, that's not really the point of this movie. The point of this movie is more May's story and what's, Proximus Caesar really wants, why he is manipulating these apes to get into this vault. And I didn't find that stuff as interesting. There wasn't as much to chew on as there would have been with the moral complexities that Caesar's, legacy brings to all these characters. And I said this in my Letterboxd reviews when I rewatched, Rise, Dawn, and War for the Planet of the Apes just over the past couple weeks. I said that Matt Reeves' approach to these films was a more like drama, like a character-driven drama approach to like these big action blockbuster spectacles. Whereas, this film is more so taking that big action blockbuster spectacle approach to this movie and having that character drama as the cherry on top, versus, the reverse of that, of, really focusing on the character dramas, the morality, and these decisions that, Caesar made throughout the trilogy. And this one feels more in line with what Rise of the Planet of the Apes was, which is just a really fun, big summer action blockbuster. That's, there's nothing wrong with that. I do think that this movie is still better than a lot of the other summer action blockbusters that we've had in recent years, and I do think this is better than something like The Fall Guy, which came out last week, but I wanted it to be more, because War and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes were more than just that. And I think the biggest mistake this movie could have made is by not letting Raka and Proximus Caesar interact with each other whatsoever in this film, because I think that would have given this movie just that push forward into being a lot deeper and a lot more meaningful than it ended up being in the final edit. And I think you could have shifted a couple things around. I didn't need the bridge sequence. Maybe they could have been caught, in the human hunting sequence. Maybe they could have been brought to the kingdom a bit earlier, and we got to see Proximus Caesar a bit earlier, because that's another flaw that I have with this film, is he was a great villain. I love Kevin Durand in this role, and I cannot wait for them to do the motion capture cut of this film on the physical media release, the 4K Blu-ray, when they do that, which I love the idea of doing that. I wish they did that with the other films, just to see the actual performances behind the performance capture, because I do think that performance capture is really well done in these films, better than really any other franchise that's doing this sort of stuff, besides, I guess, Avatar: The Way of Water. But, that's James Cameron doing his own thing. But to get that in a film like this is always great to see, and I think Kevin Durand was great in this role. I just think it was a bit too late to introduce him into this film, to make him be the big bad of this movie, because I wanted more of him. I wanted to get deeper into his ideologies and how he came into power, and why he uses the power, why he uses Caesar's words in the way that he does in terms of like controlling his people, and see what he really feels about that, and what Raka feels about that, and what Noah feels about that. And the movie just wasn't really about that. So what is this film really about? Well, that's where I get into the questions that I had after watching this the first time around, with May's character, played by Freya Allan, who I thought was pretty good in this movie, but on first watch, her constant, changes in motivations and allegiances throughout this entire film really threw me off, because she lies throughout the entirety of this film. She starts off scavenging food off of, Noah's character, off of the Eagle clan, and kind of being this little pest, essentially, to all these characters, pretending to be like every other human in this world at this point, which is not able to speak, and is, more of what apes used to be in this world. And then you find out that she actually can speak, and that she has been pretending this entire time. And it's like, okay, so why did she lie? Was she just lying because she was afraid of what, these apes would do to her? If it's like a trust issue with these things, if she didn't want to, let go of her secrets. But then you find out that she was actually trying to go to Proximus Caesar's kingdom this entire time, because she also wants to get into this giant safe, this vault that Proximus has been trying to break into for months. And so her storyline is very much in line with, what we've seen with the other human storylines throughout this entire, franchise, was essentially to bring humanity back, to let them be prominent once again in the world, to get access to information that is held in this vault, this key for this communication device that she's going to eventually use to help the humans communicate across, the world, to see who else is left in the planet, essentially. And she also has this idea, this motivations to destroy everything that is in this vault, because she doesn't want the apes to get a hold of that, because that's essentially Proximus Caesar's goal in this film. His motivations in this film is to cheat evolution, essentially, to skip all those centuries and millions of years of evolution to get to the point where, he has all these weaponry, he has the technology that humans used to have. He's being taught by William H. Macy, who's in this film as a human character. He's not playing an ape, which was a big surprise to me to see him pop up in this movie. I knew he was cast, but it didn't really say who he was playing. I wasn't expecting him to be a human character in this movie, but he is, and he's essentially teaching Proximus Caesar Roman history, and he's teaching him who humans were back in the past in this world. And Proximus wants to skip years of evolution, and he wants to get right to where humans were in their prominence. He wants to get the weaponry. He wants to keep building his kingdom to where he can essentially rule the world. And I don't know, I just don't find that storyline as interesting as if the idea of Caesar's legacy and his teachings and that morality, that clashing ideologies, were more so the focus towards the end of this film. But again, I do think Kevin Durand was great. I do think Freya Allan is pretty good in this movie, and I do like the direction that they're going with Freya Allan's character. But that's where I left this movie with questions, because on rewatch, I think the thing that helped the most in terms of this movie, which I've seen a lot of reviews of people complaining about Freya Allan's character and the human storyline not being as interesting, and I think because they kept her storyline, her motivation, such a mystery throughout the entire film until literally one of the final scenes where she goes back to her bunker with other humans and they're trying to communicate across the world, and they get access to that. She succeeds in her goal at the cost of the humanity of this character, because she betrays Noah's character. She uses him and ANAYA and SOONA to get into this vault to help her get through all this stuff. And once they have this plan to blow up the bridge and to flood all this stuff to get rid of this vault, essentially, she has this plan. When the vault opens and Proximus Caesar is there with Noah's mother and his entire clan, his motivations changes now. He cares more about his clan than he does the destruction of all this stuff that is inside of this vault, to try to keep Proximus Caesar away from the weaponry that is inside of this vault, to keep him away from the power that is being held inside of the vault. And May's character doesn't really care for humans or for apes. She wants humans to go back into prominence. And Noah's character even says at one point, would he want us to go back to being silent? Would he want us to go back into our cages? What is her goal and motivations? And I see this as much more of an origin story for her as a form of antagonist in the next film. And I think that could be extremely interesting. One thing that Rise of the Planet of the Apes did extremely well was how subtle it was in introducing other characters like Rocket, like Koba in specific, that was a little bit more subtle, and the next film really took that character and ran with it and made Koba such an interesting villain in that second film. And now you have Freya Allan in this film, who is kind of friendly with Noah throughout the entirety of the film, but then betrays him at the ending of this film by still setting off the bomb, by letting the water flow, and by putting his entire clan in mortal danger. And to see that was also probably one of the better action sequences in the movie, seeing this vault being flooded with all the water and all the apes desperately trying to get up, and there's that big gorilla that Noah had to take out in this sequence. I loved all of that stuff, but especially on rewatch, May's, motivations in doing this was a lot more interesting. That conversation that she had at the end of the movie with Noah, where Noah essentially takes that necklace that Raka had gave him, the symbol of Caesar, and said that this is very important, that you need this more than I do, because I think May's character, in terms of everybody in this film, is the most lost in terms of her motivations. She is going out on this quest to save humanity at the cost of her own humanity, because she betrays Noah in order to get to what she wanted, and I find that to be very interesting. So I think that this character, although it was a bit rocky, and I think, on rewatch, really paying attention to her motivations and her lies and to kind of piece together her story, I find her much more interesting on second watch, because she can either make or break this trilogy, trilogy, because if they go ahead with another film and they focus on her and how humanity now has the resources again to possibly take over the world, and to have her kind of be stuck in the middle of that, because Noah showed her mercy. Noah showed her what apes, can be. He showed her the morality that Caesar kind of led with, that, that teachings that she essentially needs to learn from. And now she's stuck between the apes and the humans in a very interesting place where Jason Clarke's character was kind of stuck in Dawn for the Planet of the Apes. And yes, maybe that is kind of repeating beats that we've had in the past, but if they do it well, it could be very interesting. But that also depends if they don't do something like that, and if this character doesn't, end up being important later on. Again, this could either make or break the trilogy. I think this is an interesting setup for what they can do in the future with this character, but as it stands right now, again, lots of questions with this character, and will it be repeating beats that we've already had in the past, or could it still be interesting? Could they have this be a good jumping off point for the future? But those are going to be my spoilery-filled thoughts on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I'm very curious to hear your perspective on especially May's character, because after the first watch, I found her to be the most conflicting part of this movie, and on rewatch, I found her to be one of the more interesting characters in this movie. So did you kind of feel conflicted like I did walking out of this movie at first? After rewatch, I think this movie worked a lot better for me, and I do really enjoy this movie, probably just a little bit more than Rise. I'm still a little bit conflicted on Rise. Again, looking at my Letterboxd to see more thoughts on that film, but I really did enjoy this film. I think it was just a little step down from Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes, but I do think that this has the potential to grow into yet another great trilogy in this franchise that has been consistently good for the past 10 plus years now, which has been really exciting. This is, I believe, this is either the 9th or 10th Planet of the Apes movie in general, if you count all the older films, and if you count, the Tim Burton one, which I need to go back and watch all of these films because, I find them to be very interesting. I'm a completionist as well, so let me know your thoughts on this film and how it ranks with the rest of the films in this franchise. And of course, if you did enjoy this review, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video to show me that you did enjoy. Like I said, comment down below, and I hope to see you all in my next one.